Welcome. This is our second CCCAP Student Design Competition Lecture Series. I'm Betsy Masters, the Secretary of the CCCAP, and also a member of the Student Design Competition Committee. And I'd like to welcome Bill Halter, who is our speaker today. He's a principal with Cooper Carey in Atlanta. He has over 30 years experience in mixed-use projects. He's known for creating spaces that are approachable, sophisticated, and practical. He's led design projects ranging from large corporate campuses to smaller nonprofit buildings. And Bill has a deep experience and wide range of experience. And I think I'm just going to turn it over to Bill at this point to tell us a little bit more about yourself and then talk about finding sanctuary.
Well, thanks, Betsy. It's great to be on your program here and help you with this exciting assignment. Great to see you after all these years as we were together at Ohio State.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of fun to finally reconnect. So yeah, I have found my passion shortly after I came to Atlanta, which was to really work with developers, and I enjoyed the idea that they really had the vision to find land and see the potential to make that land better and better in the sense of not only from a business standpoint, but from the community perspective. I've learned very quickly that successful projects really depend on knowing the community you're building them in and understanding what that aspect of the ownership is looking for, but also obviously you're looking to understand your client specific requirements and what it is they're trying to accomplish with the project. So with that, this presentation I'm about to give really tries to zero in on how to win work, and not just as a professional practice person, but as a student, how to compel the jury and touch the things that matter to them. So this show is not a very long show, but it's going to touch on a couple of key ideas. I've called it Finding Sanctuary. This is an exciting idea, a tough one. Immigration brings with it a lot of challenges politically, emotionally, physically. You're dealing with human beings that are trying to find a new life. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'll move on to the next slide here. I think I know how to do that. So I want to hit on three big ideas. And the intent here is that design can solve a lot of problems. It's not going to solve every problem, but as architects and planners, city planners, urban planners, we grapple with a lot of community issues, political issues. So these three big ideas I want to talk about today are, when you're designing this particular kind of project in a city, you want to know your client, you want to research the end user and the issues that will matter to that end user. We're going to talk a little bit about speaking to what matters most. So focusing on those key issues once you've identified them, and then solve for them so that you can come back and say, okay, here's the problem and here's a solution. And then probably one of the most important things is, how do you use graphics? You draw what you need. Everything you draw, everything you put on paper or model needs to have a purpose. So that's what we're going to talk about. So knowing your client, and I guess in this case the jury, and I've identified the three jury members here. You may not know the gentleman at the bottom of this stack. That is the mayor of Atlanta. And I promise you, our mayor will be interested in what this project would mean to his city, as would anyone else in the surrounding area. But I put him up there really as a sort of identifier for the importance of understanding city policy and attitudes. And in this case, I think our mayor is one that has a great reverence for people that need a leg up in the world. So I don't know how much of that you're going to get into, but it is something that would matter in a project like this. And of course, the users themselves, and you see here, I just grabbed some imagery off the internet of here's a family coming in. They're stressed out. They're coming with children with very few belongings. They likely don't speak our language. They're really at a total disadvantage as they are being processed through this system as they make their way to the sanctuary city. So, and then there's sort of this idea of the operational side of a project like this. You know, there's certain things you just got to be able to do. How do you think about this facility as a place that that can be, you know, managed and in every respect, really. I mean, how do you get to it? How do you depart from it? How do you bring people to it? How does it address the surroundings, but just the operations of the day to day? And I'm no expert on these kind of facilities, but I'm sure there's things you should know about them as you get into this. Sorry. Oop. So the next topic is deciding on what it is you think from your research that will matter the most, the things that will resonate, that will make sense, that will get a sort of head nod that you've really thought through the project. In this case, being from Atlanta, I know this location quite well. It is pretty deep inside the city, inside the downtown district. So getting to it, you're going to have to cross into, you know, the city, go through several blocks to get to it. And then once you get there, you know, what is the arrival like? You know, where are these people coming by bus? Are they coming by private vehicle, by van? You know, what does that mean to the site? And you know, how does that function in a downtown area? And then you know, what are the compatibility issues? How do you address, you know, the local context? This is a convention center city, and this happens to be right on a street that sees a lot of out-of-town visitors. So how do you think about that experience from both sides, and from both the user, those that are coming into the facility, and those that are crossing, you know, next to it? And then safety and comfort. You know, you want to think about creating an environment that appeals and is safe, that people feel they are in control at this point in their journey. And I mentioned politics earlier. There could be controversy here. You might want to be prepared for that, and maybe this is an opportunity. You happen to be right across the street from the Center for Civil and Human Rights, which is an interesting juxtaposition, and maybe that's part of the reason this site was chosen. But when I happened to be involved in the early design of that project, and one of the things we talked about was, you know, sort of civil disobedience, and the idea that you could protest and have a public discourse on things that matter. And we all know that immigration is probably one of the top two topics on the lips of every politician right now. So I think that could be an interesting dynamic. And then the last thing, well, make sure I covered everything there. So politics disruption, yeah, that was the last thing I wanted to touch on there. And the last point is, once you have kind of narrowed down the points you want to make, the top 3 or 5 topics, don't pick too many. You just got to illustrate it. And I'm just showing, you know, visual graphics here. And I tried to sort of show a progression. You start with diagrams. How do you start to analyze the situation? How do you begin to see how circulation works? Where are the energy zones? Where are places where there's conflicting, you know, crossover traffic? You know, where is the right spot for a sort of crossroads where you might have a public space? And you start to sketch, and I'm a big fan of freehand sketching. It is unfortunately a little bit of a lost art. I hope you students are still using your eye-hand coordination between a pen and paper, not just keyboards, because I'll tell you, it's always more impactful. it will convey much more rapidly to your client. And I've not met a client yet, with as much technology as we have out there, that doesn't just get mesmerized by when a designer picks up the pen and starts sketching. It doesn't have to be a great sketch. It's just they just are amazed by that talent. So you develop those sketches, and then you slowly develop into a more hardline drawing. And at every stage, you're really thinking about, is this drawing conveying an idea? Is it making a point? Be clear, be crisp. Don't draw things you don't need, and really drive your points home. So that's really my presentation today. I hope that was helpful, and good luck.
Okay, that's really great, Bill, and I'm glad that you mentioned the issues related to graphics. We don't have a lot of very specific requirements in this competition. There's some general requirements, and then it's kind of up to the students, the entrants, to figure out, how much more and what type of drawing they need to include. So I think it's really great that you've got some drawings here that are more diagrammatic, that help or could help explain, something about how a building and place or organized, how they were conceived. What was that initial generator that brought you to the final design? You've got really maybe the finished product here on the lower right, and all the other drawings are really more about strategies and advancing those strategies. So those are so important. And sometimes we get too focused on just what the final product is and our really nice finished rendered drawings. And we forget to include, all of the early conceptual work and the scribbles. I know my students still do a lot of scribbles. And, that's what helps to support your idea. So this was really great, Bill. And I thank you. I'm trying to think if there are any other questions here. Could you tell us just a little bit more about the Center for Civil and Human Rights?
Sure. I mean, it was the idea of one of our past Mayor Shirley Franklin, that, as you may know, Atlanta is the home of Martin Luther King, and his legacy still resonates very, very strongly in the community. There's the King Center, which talks about his life and his journey, but there's plenty of other, museums that talk about similar situations. It started out as a civil rights museum, but I think it evolved into civil and human rights, I think, because it became more of a global story, not just national. But it was just a wonderful idea that there was money raised, and it's a very sophisticated facility. If you are in the neighborhood, it's a great place to visit. There's some pretty powerful exhibits that run through it, that talk about, obviously the Black story in America, African American story, but there's a lot of other stories that are told, a lot of traveling shows that talk about things. But it was really just a way to really take the scare, I guess, a little bit away from this story. I think it intimidates a lot of people to talk about some of the people in our world that have not been treated fairly, just for various reasons. The thing I found interesting about it is it is across the mall, or the park, from the Coca-Cola Museum and the aquarium. And there was some discussion about the location being not sacred enough. And a wise person said, no, we want to draw those people here. We want to bring kids and people that this is not supposed to be a place that is not for families. This is, in an interesting way, it was the irony of mixing it in with what would otherwise be for much more family friendly venues, actually made it more accessible and more popular to a lot more people. But it's been a great success, and yeah, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition for this site. And not to switch gears, that's a pretty heavy subject, but I want to go back to the graphics thing, Betsy, because I know you had asked me to talk about that, and I thank you for articulating that a little better than I did. I just want to emphasize once again, don't get into the computer any sooner than you need to. I see it so often that you kind of get an idea that's way out ahead of really taking the time to explore the site, to diagram the site, to understand the sort of different aspects of what happens on a particular site. What are the crossroads? What are the things you're connecting to one another? Understanding the primary streets and the secondary streets and the back streets, and what are you trying to address? What are you looking at? What is the front door? Where does the front door belong? And I always tell my team the architecture is the easy part. Making a building look great is easy once you understand where everything goes. Because when you're drawing a building, when you're sketching at that level, you learn how to sort of really draw all the elements that matter. Where's this sort of front, like concourse, for example? Where is the sunlight coming in? How does that? And once you start to figure some of those things out, the architecture just starts to become much more defensible, and that's really important. I thanks for putting a sharper point on that.
Yeah, and how a building weaves itself into an urban site. That's what you're talking about. It's just so critical. And if you do it right, we probably don't really notice, except for maybe architects do. But if you don't do it right, as people are trying to use the building, it makes it difficult. And you do notice that things aren't really working. And I think, there was a moment when we were in school together at Ohio State where I started reading a lot of things like Christian Norberg Schultz. And all of a sudden I realized that architecture wasn't just about moving spaces around and, making a building, but it was about the possibility that we could communicate other ideas, using the architecture. And I think how it connects into the city is part of that. So, okay, great.
Yeah,
Thanks, Bill.
you're
And
welcome.
thank you everyone for listening to this. And we will have at least one other lecture in this series. And in a few days, the lectures from last year will also be available. Again, I think they just expired and I have to translate them into, I think it's a YouTube. So thank you for joining us.